are about to invoke on something that's just totally unique in our country by making the country fantastic again. So learn more about the veterans if you can. We have a lot of supporters. You don't have to be a veteran to be in our group. We have lots of supporters. One of them, Richard, back there on the sound and works with the video, has never been in the service, but he has done so much service for our organization. It is totally mind-boggling. So once again, Richard, thank you. And now I'm feeling a little tired. I think I'll sit down and introduce you to David Jolly, the next governor of Florida.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's very kind, but you have no idea what I'm about to say. To the candidates, thank you to each one of you. We've become friends over the last year. Folks, let's give a round of applause to those who are standing for this. I love the reference to Thomas Paine and common sense. I got to make sure what I'm about to tell you isn't already on the board, and it's not. But I mean this. This is fortuitous. Thomas Paine said something in Common Sense that I think should be a guiding light for us at this moment in history, in this election cycle. Thomas Paine said, we have a chance to start the world over again. That was 250 years ago, but it's never been more true, folks. We've got a chance to start the world over again. We do. We do. And we need to. We need to. Because we are a nation and a state that is gripped by an economic crisis that's leaving at least half of our people behind. And we're exhausted by culture wars where people are being marginalized based on the color of their skin, where they were born, who they love, or who they worship. And so, yes, this is an inflection point, not only in American history, but in our politics and in our culture and who we are as a people. It is time to start over again. It is time to start a coalition that renews the spirit and the strength of who we can be as a country. Because we are not strong tonight. We are not great tonight, but our resiliency is emerging. Our resiliency is emerging. When Thomas Paine uttered those words, we have a chance to start the world over again. He wasn't speaking to a political convention. He wasn't speaking just to people who agreed with him. He was speaking to loyalists. He was speaking to rebels. He was speaking to agrarians. He was speaking to industrialists. But he was saying, this is the moment. This is the moment, folks. This is the moment. I will tell you this, and I mean this, having been in politics about 30 years. I haven't been on the ballot in 10. I've been out of politics long enough to tell the truth. If the election were tonight, we'd win this race. If the election were tonight, we'd win this race, folks. I mean that. I mean that. Listen. That's not vanity. That's not vanity. And I don't mean me. I mean we, all of us. Because if you look what's happening across the country and throughout the state of Florida for the past year, we have seen voters stepping up saying, no, we're not going in that direction anymore. Our congressional special elections already swung last year by 15 and 16 points. Our state legislative races by 20 points. The city of Miami elected a Democratic mayor for the first time in 30 years. And it wasn't even close. It was 19 points. Mar-a-Lago just elected a Democratic state legislator. Folks, we're gaining ground in the villages. The villages. And as one Republican pollster told me from Sarasota County, he said the red wall in Sarasota is starting to crumble as well. Listen. I got all excited about Thomas Paine. I kind of jumped to how I usually end my remarks, and I started with that. But let me do a couple of things, and we'll open it up to conversation and questions. Let me give a little bit more of an introduction to myself. I want to share with you the values of this campaign, values that I think are rooted in the Democratic Party traditions, but so much bigger than our parties. And one of the things I like about being a Democrat is I get to accept math. Right? And science and data and public health and vaccines and all the other things that contribute to human progress. But math is math. There are not enough Democrats in the state tonight to elect a Democratic governor. We need our independent and Republican friends in this moment, in this coalition. And so I'm not asking anyone to identify themselves. Please don't. But I want to say thank you to the independents and Republicans in the room tonight, because I know you're here and we need you and you're welcome and we want you to be part of our coalition. So my wife and I live up in Pinellas County. She's not here tonight because we have 2 young children, 7 and 5. Right? I'm 53. You don't have to Google it. I'm 53. You heard me stutter because just a month ago they were 6 and 4. And for the past year, I've been saying they're 6 and 4. They're now 7 and 5. The Grossmans babysat them when they were 6 and 4. They're going to ask about y'all tonight, by the way. I was born in Pinellas. My father was a pastor. We moved to Miami for about 10 or 12 years. I went to high school in Pasco County, graduated there, lived in Pensacola. I've lived all over the state. I'm a 5th-generation Floridian. But as I always say, it doesn't make me a lick better than someone who moved here yesterday. But I know I believe in this state deeply. We're raising our kids in this state out of choice. But some nights we ask ourselves if it's the responsible decision to raise our kids in Florida. You don't have to have kids or grandkids to know that. Many of us are wondering, is this a state that is worthy of our continued investment? We believe it is. That's why candidates run for office. That's why I'm running for governor. That's why we continue to be active in civic engagement, why you are here tonight, why you hold up signs at the No Kings rally, you show up to vote, you register people to vote, because we believe that Florida is worth saving. But we are a state right now careening towards a cliff where too many people are asking if we should continue to call Florida home. A couple other things about my introduction. I speak openly about my faith. Please be patient with me on this. I want to explain it for a couple of reasons. First, it's part of who I am. I don't speak of it to evangelize. That's not appropriate as a candidate, but it's part of who I am. I shared with you I'm married, what I do in life, where I live. Yes, faith is part of my journey, and it's where I draw my strength. But I also say it for 2 reasons. One, I think we need more candidates willing and capable to have conversations with the faith community, because I think restoring the values have to be a realignment with the teachings of faith across the country. But I also say in a state that launched culture wars based on the perversion of the teachings of a faith that I subscribe to, I think we need a governor who can resoundingly declare that their personal and private faith stops at the steps to the State House. That is what the Constitution ordains. It's what the law requires. And for people of faith, whatever faith that might be, it doesn't weaken your faith. It strengthens your faith to recognize that limitation. And I'm also careful with it because let's be honest about the politics. Florida's a big state. You start in South Florida, you're in the Old Testament. You move north, you get to the New Testament. By the time you get to the Panhandle, you're full-blown Gospels and Revelation, folks. But we have this beautiful diversity of faith. But I'll also tell you this, there are people across the state tonight, in the room tonight, who choose not to practice any faith whatsoever. And the affinity that I've been able to build, the common ground that I've been able to build with people who simply believe in what Jefferson declared as the very natural rights of man. You see, there are values that we all share, regardless of whether that's rooted in Jeffersonian's natural rights or the teachings of a faith that one might subscribe to. Those values are what I want to talk about a little bit as we translate them into politics. What are the values that get us back, turn the corner, and allow us to be the country and the state that we know we can be? My wife and I often say that part of this race, part of this moment, is simply believing in better, believing that we're better than this moment, that we can be better than this moment, and that we should expect better from our elected officials, from all of us. This is a moment where we know we must believe in better. What does that look like in our politics? In our politics, what does that look like? You know, I mentioned two things about my introduction. I left off the last one. Mine is a story of change. I served in Congress, and I was a Republican when I was in Congress. I apologize for those years if you're offended by those. But listen, mine's a story of change. I don't run from it. I don't hide from it. I celebrate my change. Isn't the point of our politics to win hearts and minds, to refine people, to build coalition with new thoughts and new ideas? You see, change was part of my story, not just my party, but my positions. I don't shy away from that. I don't think the problem in politics are people who change. I think the problem are people who won't change. You see, when I got to two quick issues. I won't belabor a lot of issues tonight, but 2 quick issues. When I got to Congress, I learned I was wrongly applying my faith teachings on reproductive freedom to a constitutional question. I got some things wrong. And as I served, I started to move. And where I had started off supporting a lot of traditional pro-life, anti-choice legislation, I ended up being the only Republican to vote against the Planned Parenthood investigation. When they tried to strip funding from Planned Parenthood, I offered the compromise to save $400 million for reproductive care in underserved communities across the country. I then moved to a full embrace of Roe and Casey, and when Amendment 4 was on the ballot, I supported Amendment 4, and as governor, I would introduce it as a legislative package. But that is not where I started. That is part of my journey, not because I decided to run for governor, but because as I was serving in Congress, I started to realize that I had a fidelity, that I owed a duty to hold the public trust to a community and to fundamentally protect everybody's rights. And so, yes, serving allowed me to learn and to grow. On guns, I had a fairly traditional Second Amendment approach. We weren't a gun-heavy family, but I went into it with a somewhat traditional Second Amendment approach. But as we face mass shootings and school shootings, I realized there's so much more we can do with gun violence prevention legislation, and I've become an aggressive advocate for gun violence prevention legislation across the state of Florida. I want to see our leaders grow. I want to see our leaders grow. That is part of this exercise. You can't simply say that the answers 50 years ago are the answers for now. You have to recognize how we apply the basic principles and values, the convictions with which we should approach governing to modern questions. So what are those three values that I mentioned? The three values that I believe are rooted in democratic tradition, from FDR to JFK to Barack Obama and so many others, but values that are bigger than our party. First, the economy should work for everyone. The economy should work for everyone. Now listen, I don't think we should condemn success. I think we should congratulate success. Some people work very hard and they fall into good fortune. Some people get downright lucky. Congratulations. We don't need to fight the haves to fight for the have-nots. We should celebrate success and encourage more success in the state of Florida, more economic success in the state of Florida. But the reality is the economy is not working for everyone. Half the state tonight doesn't have enough savings to last 2 weeks. They can't absorb a healthcare emergency, a lost job, a divorce. More people are going without healthcare in the state of Florida than ever before. We lack access to primary care in more communities across the state of Florida, and as a result, we are 49th in avoidable hospital costs. People can't stay in their home because a homeowner's insurance market is collapsing and pricing them out of the only home they've known for decades. People can't attain home ownership because of homeowners insurance. And for our renters, the costs of affordable and workforce housing is out of reach and people are leaving the state. We have families that don't know where to educate their kids because we've abandoned public education in the state of Florida and set up a choice program where choice schools are not even required to teach your kid to read, and they get to charge you tuition on top of a voucher. So Florida's families don't know where to educate their kids. You see, the economy's not working for everybody, and it should. So the second value is a corollary to that. It sounds a little bit like Bill Clinton in '92, but I simply think government can do some things to make our lives better. And we shouldn't apologize for that. It's our government. We pay for it. It's our taxpayers. It should be lean and efficient and held accountable. And where the private sector has a better solution, God bless you, let the private sector solve it. But there are certain things the private sector will never do because it's not incentivized to. And the corollary is about what I just talked about. Access to housing, healthcare, education, investments in the environment, investments in safe communities and public safety. There's not a private sector model that allows us to ensure that access to housing, healthcare, education, protection of the environment is always going to be provided for. I do think when it comes to for homeowners, we need a state catastrophic fund for homeowners insurance. Recognize that the homeowners insurance market has collapsed. We've denied climate science. We refuse to make the investments necessary for resiliency. There is no longer an affordable way to cover homeowners insurance. Let's move hurricane and wind coverage out of the private market into a sovereign wealth fund, cut homeowners insurance by 60 to 70%. That is doable. That is doable, folks. That is doable. It is the only actuarially sound way that we will ever cover climate change and natural disasters, whether it's hurricanes in Florida, wildfires in California, tornadoes in Tornado Alley. It is the only way that Wall Street is ever going to underwrite the risk is when a state steps in with a sovereign wealth fund. My Republican friends call it socialism. I just call it cheaper insurance. But I'll also tell you this, my Republican friends already have a hurricane fund, and you know what they use it for? To bail out insurance companies. Yeah, right? What kind of socialism is good? Because apparently they've adopted socialism for insurance companies, but not for homeowners. Look, we need a state catastrophic fund. I think we should cap the rate of profit for our investor-backed utilities. For some people to say, whoa, isn't that market control? Well, we already do it in the state of Florida. We do. We have a system of regulated monopolies where every year or so they have to come to us asking for what the allowable profit is. And our profit in Florida for our investor-backed utilities is always a couple points higher than the national average, for no reason except to transfer money from ratepayers as profit into the investors. I think we should cap the rate of profits at the national average. It's an almost 10% return for our private utility companies, but in the midst of an economic crisis, it saves hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion for ratepayers. For our renters, where the real crisis emerges. The real crisis is emerging within our rental community. I have a fundamental leadership theory: chase what's working. We know how to deliver more units of workforce and affordable housing. We have plans that work. We have projects that work all around the state, so let's invest more in it. Because right now, accessibility to workforce and affordable housing has gotten so bad that there's a school district in the Pensacola area where the truancy rates are approaching levels so high that the school is about to be penalized. But their truancy rates aren't high because the kids don't want to learn and the parents don't want to send them to school. It's because the parents keep jumping rents month to month to try to have a roof over the head of their children, and they worry less about where to educate their kids. We need to work on delivering workforce and affordable housing, but we have public-private partnerships that already work. We just haven't chosen to invest in it. You see, there are values involved in this. I do think when it comes to health care, we should expand Medicaid. We should expand Medicaid as a state. But I don't trust the insurance-driven platforms to deliver affordable health care. I just don't. I hope they do. I hope they do. And if the private sector figures this out, God bless you. Let's let that happen. But I don't think anybody can tell you that the insurance-driven health care platforms are on the brink of providing affordable health care. They're not. And so let's fight for Medicaid expansion, but I'll tell you something we should do right now. I've done over 200 town halls across the state. I don't know how Lawton Childs did it by foot, by the way, folks. I think we need to scale up and expand the direct delivery of primary health care services in all 67 counties across the state of Florida. And there's a reason why. There's a reason why. As I mentioned, more people are going without health care than ever before, and we're 49th in avoidable hospital costs in the state of Florida. We know from the other 40 states that expanded Medicaid that when you improve access to health care, you improve the qualitative outcomes of beneficiaries, and you reduce the economic burden on the state. So whether you want to lead with your heart that more people need health care or lead with your head that it just makes good math, let's expand primary health care services across the state. And when people say, oh, that's big government, no. We're not having the argument about the role of government, the left-right spectrum, conservative, progressive. I don't care about that stuff anymore. I'm in a very post-partisan, post-ideological place in my life. We got big problems that need big solutions. And I'll tell you what, we can deliver health care across the state starting in year one, and here's how. We already do it in many communities. Whether it's federally qualified health centers that are really doing great work in the Panhandle, whether it's county health clinics like Broward is excelling at, or whether it's the nonprofit that we see in Little Haiti that sees over 300 patients every week, we're doing it right now. We're just not providing the resources to scale it up. So let's chase what's working and deliver more health care, primary health care in underserved communities in the state of Florida, because it's the right thing to do, but it's an economic return to the state as well. So housing, health care. The third area where government can improve our lives is investing in public education. Investing in public education. I want to be very specific here. Because we're now at the point of this campaign where everything I say goes back to my opponents on video and people have it on their cell phone and they try to say, oh, Jolly said this. Yeah, I'm going to say it 1,000 more times. We are a state that chose 25 years ago to attack and abandon and defund public education, and it's a moral wrong that we did so. It's a moral wrong. My critics who want to point at underperforming schools, it is because we have defunded them and we pay our teachers dead last in the nation. Dead last in the nation. It's a recruitment and a retention problem, and it's leaving a generation of kids behind.
We are asking our public schools to do more with less than they ever have before, and we are funding choice schools that don't even have to teach your kid to read. They don't have to teach your kid to read. For those of you who don't have a first grade kid right now, I'm looking around, I'm not sure there's many. Listen, a first grade kid in a choice school in Florida, the school doesn't have to teach the kid to read. If a kid can't read, they get to kick him out, send them back to public school, keep the voucher and say, send us a kid who can read. That's the reality. They don't have to provide an individual education program. For college bound, they don't have to provide access to academics, excellence, trigonometry in 10th grade. They don't have to provide a pipeline to the trades or the arts. They don't have to do any of that. We require our public schools to provide all of this to every single student that walks through the doors. Our choice schools get to self-select and still not provide the services that are required. So, I think we need a 10-year renaissance in public education in the state of Florida. Be a state that chooses to lead the nation in public education. And we're also at the point of this campaign where people say, gotcha. Well, guess what? I'm about to reveal something for you I talk about. Our kids go to a choice school. You know why? Because we have abandoned access to public education in too many communities. We need more community schools with more teachers who are paid more. That's what we need. And we need to be a state that chooses to lead in public education so that Florida's families want to rush into the public education environment. Because I will tell you tonight, while our kids go to a choice school, I don't know where to educate my kids. I'm a father of a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, a fifth-generation Floridian, and I don't know where to educate my kids in the state of Florida. Because we've abandoned public education and we've set up choice schools that don't have to teach your kid to read. They take the voucher and they charge you tuition on top of it. So what do? We celebrate a 10-year renaissance of public education. We give teachers a 30% pay raise. We move them into the top half nationally. We shouldn't tolerate politicians who don't have a way to pay for anything. Listen, we can take tourist development tax dollars right now, 91% of which are paid from out-of-state visitors, and create a renaissance in public education, pay teachers in the top half nationally, recover any failing properties, and invest in the secondary services like mental health counseling and food services. We can choose to do that. Now, what do we say to choice? I say this, we don't have to kill the choice program, but there's a whole new set of rules. If you're going to take a voucher, you have to provide the same services, standards, offerings, be measured by the same tests and the same credentials as our public schools do. And there's one last rule, if you take a voucher for a kid, you don't get to charge tuition on top of that. Because God bless Jeb Bush, who told us this was about helping families in need. Well, guess what? We have disenfranchised the families in most need when choice schools get to charge tuition on top of vouchers. It's wrong. We have a crisis in public education in the state of Florida, and many of my opponents in this race will say, oh yeah, but look at third-grade test scores. They're performing so well nationally. You know what the answer to that is? Look at eighth-grade test scores, because we are falling off the cliff because we have abandoned funding a pipeline that allows opportunity for all kids in the state of Florida. We have a crisis in education. So, yes, the government can improve our lives. It should be lean and efficient, but when it comes to housing, healthcare, education, investing in environmental resiliency, accepting that climate science is actually real and allowing it to inform public policy, fighting for clean air and clean water, clean and renewable energies across the state of Florida, yes, there's a lot the government can do. And I know I'm running a little long on time. I'll wrap this up, I promise, but the last thing I want to talk about where government can improve our lives is government should provide for public safety. We should be a state that's tough on crime. We should be. Now, I don't think this governor is fighting crime. I think he's fighting communities. He's not serious about fighting crime. He's rounding up people that don't even have so much as a speeding ticket over the last 12 years, and he's throwing them in Alligator Alcatraz, and it is wrong. It is wrong. People deserve a pathway to legal status in this state if they have not engaged in a property or violent crime. But for someone who has committed a crime in the state of Florida, we're going to hold you accountable. We're not going to be soft on crime. That means if you were born here, if you immigrated here, if you're a politician who steals $10 million from the Medicaid program, yes. If you're a for-profit charter school company that is skimming money out of the till and not educating kids, yeah, we're going to hold you accountable for that. If you're engaged in some level of what should be public corruption, though the law doesn't recognize it,
and you use the power of government to override local voters in Key West, take $1 million from the cruise line industry and take away direct democracy from people who wanted to ban big cruise ships? Yeah, look, we're going to fight corruption and crime in the state of Florida. And it's going to look a little different than what this governor's doing. So the economy should work for everyone. Government can do its part. The third value is very simple, and I'll close with this value. We must be a state. We must be a nation. And I'm a proud Florida Democrat because I know there's a fundamental truth that we believe in. Absolutely everyone's rights should be protected and their dignity celebrated. Their rights should be protected and their dignity celebrated. What does that look like? Protecting people's rights, we have a playbook for that. It's called the Constitution. We can go to the courts, we win more than we lose. The losses hurt. But over the arc of history, it bends towards justice. We know that. So yes, we're going to fight to protect everybody's rights, whether it's their voting rights in the state, their reproductive freedom, or their basic civil liberties. We're going to fight for everyone's fundamental rights. But we're going to celebrate everyone's dignity in the state of Florida once again. This is bigger than politics. This is bigger than politics. This is about using voices of leadership and voices of our community to say in a state that launched culture wars, it's wrong. It's wrong. I don't often think about election night. I don't play that kind of game. But driving across Alligator Alley overnight one night, I thought, what is really motivating me in this angst, and this anxiety, and this anger I have about a state that launched culture wars? And I realized there's a moment on election night that I hope we get to celebrate. I want to stand up and say, as the next governor of Florida, to the world, on behalf of the state that launched culture wars 8 years ago, we apologize. We are sorry. Everybody is welcome to live and visit again in the state of Florida. Regardless of the color of your skin, where you're born, who you love, or who you worship, you are welcomed, you are celebrated, we want to invest in you. What does that look like in policy? I'll give you a couple ideas. How about this? Let teachers teach and bring back the books. Let teachers teach and bring back the books. Listen, every child in the state of Florida tonight should know about the Rosewood Massacre, the Groveland Ford, should know that Harry T. Moore was murdered on Christmas Day for having the audacity of registering voters of color on the east coast of Florida. It doesn't embarrass us or shame us to know our history. It strengthens us. Because we will never recognize the darker chapters of our present if we don't first learn the darker chapters of our past. So yes. It also means let local communities determine local control and celebrate who they want to celebrate. If you want to paint a rainbow mural or a Black Lives Matter mural, God bless you, I'll buy you a can of paint. It is. The attack on DEI has not happened because the white church picnics have gotten too big. It's not happening because our St. Patrick's Day parades have gotten too big. It's because their judgment is laced with xenophobia. It's laced with homophobia. It is laced with judgment that somehow people based on who they love or who they worship have less worth, and therefore communities cannot celebrate them. It is a perversion of the fundamental teachings of any faith or what Jefferson called the natural rights of man. Listen, we are all created equally, but for some reason this state government has decided to institutionalize the marginalization of already marginalized communities, and it's wrong. I'll tell you what. Ending the culture wars also means getting rid of the ideology that has infected too many state agencies and bringing back science and data and math and all the things that contribute to human progress. You know what I get to do on my first day in office? Fire the Surgeon General of the state of Florida. Fire the Surgeon General.
Bring in someone that believes in public health. I want to point to the state university system, people that believe in institutional autonomy, academic excellence, academic advancement. Bring in people that actually are going to pursue subject matter expertise instead of ideological allegiance.
The economy should work for everyone. Government can do its part. And absolutely everyone's right should be protected and their dignity celebrated. And I'll tell you this. I gave you the ending, which is we're already winning right now. We're winning. If the election were tonight, enough voters across the state of Florida are ready to elect a Democrat. However, I worry that this will be the condition in November. We've got a lot of work to put in, and there's going to be $100 million spent trying to convince us we're all wrong when we know we're right. And so what we have to do is commit to putting in the work now to get us through November to do what we know is possible. Thomas Paine's words, though far more brilliant than my own, are similar to something that I told my daughter one night as she was crying, saying, "Dad, please don't run for governor." She said, "Don't do this." She wanted her dad to be home. She didn't like to travel. A lot of it was just the heartbreak of a girl who missed her dad and wanted story time. But part of it was also a young girl, kids today who look at politics and see it as mean and vile and nasty. Listen, what I told my daughter about 6 months ago, and I continue to tell our kids every single day, and I mean this, it's a little less eloquent than what Thomas Paine said, but I told her then, I tell her every day, and I mean this in this room. When you have a chance to change the world, you take it. You take it. You don't know how it turns out. You don't know how it's been ordained, but in a moment where the nation is broken, where our state is gripped by a crisis, we know that we are so much better than this moment. A former Republican senator said to me, "Look, I'm going to vote for you. I'm going to vote for you unless you give me a reason not to." And what he was saying is just ask us to litigate this moment. Ask us to litigate our national identity. Ask us to litigate that we are better. That we are better in this moment. You see, we all know something deep inside, regardless of whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or Republican, and it's this. We will never make America great again if we don't first make America good again.
This is a moment. This is a moment where we are standing up and fighting for the goodness of America, for the strength of America, and we are going to do what Thomas Paine told us we could do in November. We are going to start the world over again. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
We're going to do a question and answer in just a moment, but we did get a few questions in, and I'm sure you got the real answer. You mentioned it, the concentration camp alligator Alcatraz. It's built on an environmentally sensitive area and surrounded by protected wetlands. What will you do to close that facility and return it to the pre-concentration condition it is now?
I believe I have the constitutional authority as the next governor to shut down alligator Alcatraz on day one. I believe that to be the case. The land was taken from Miami-Dade County through an emergency executive action of Ron DeSantis. If I rescind that emergency executive action, the land goes back to Miami-Dade County and Mayor Cava can figure out what to do with it. But as I mentioned, we'll make sure we have sufficient detention space across the state, but we're not going to celebrate the detention of people. And if you are at Alligator Alcatraz and you might not be a documented resident, but you have no property or violent crimes, no violations whatsoever, you're only guilty of showing up on the job site for the last 10 years to earn a living, we're going to give you a state ride home to be reunited with your family. That's what we're going to do. I promise I'll keep this brief, but this is something, the values are so much bigger than the policies, right? That's a policy question, but some of you have heard me say this. I promise I'll keep it brief. I won't give you the whole sermon. You can tell my dad was a preacher. Look, so much of what we wrestle with is about who we are and what our values are. The words of Emma Lazarus, the great Colossus, the sonnet that's affixed on the Statue of Liberty, we all know the one line, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. What we don't hold on to, yes, what we don't hold on to are the lines just before that provide the context for that one line we all learn. The lines before that say, keep, O distant lands, your storied pomp. Meaning old world, old Europe, keep, you're rich, you're famous, you're fabulous, you're most successful. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. The next line, you're homeless, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Behold, I lift my lamp by the golden door. It's not policy, that's values. And I don't think this immigration policy is too hard. We know how to secure the border, and we should secure the border. If someone commits a crime, they don't belong here. But we can also be a nation that recognizes the economic and cultural contributions of our immigrant community and celebrate it for the strength that it provides. That's a value. That's a value. Once we agree on that value, the policies get pretty easy. Listen, Mayor Ferrer of Miami during the Mariel boat lift, the Cuban refugee crisis in 1980, we locked up all the Cuban refugees in the Orange Bowl, put them behind a chain link fence. Ferrer finally went to the microphone and said, if we're unwilling to welcome the refugee, we might as well throw the Statue of Liberty into the East River. That Statue of Liberty bears the great Colossus, the words of Emma Lazarus that can inform who we are right now. The policies get easy when we win the values debate.
Although Florida is the sunshine state, it ranks in the middle of residential solar per capita. Solar power generation is now cheaper than coal or natural gas. Yet state policy holds back the solar power primarily with fewer incentives. What will you do to expand solar power in Florida and lower the cost?
Let's start with an absolute truth. We have the most corrupt campaign finance system in the entire country right here in the state of Florida. That is at the root of so much of this. We should lead the nation in solar. There is a way to do it, whether we use incentives or mandates, but it starts with putting on the Public Service Commission commissioners who are going to advocate for clean and renewable energies and for solar. I'll also tell you this, I don't actually think we're that far apart with many of our utility providers. I was having a conversation with a very senior utility executive recently, and he said, look, we want to pursue that too. The problem is if we talk about it, the governor and this president whack us for sounding like we're talking about the Green New Deal. And I said, well, that's all going to change. We get to work together because you're going to be a partner in providing and delivering solar. So whether it is incentives or mandates or both, let's be a state that moves towards solar. There are a couple ways you could do that. You could look at breaking up the utility monopoly in the state of Florida. That's a big move. That's a big move. You could also, by law, require that the wholesale price conveys, when it goes back to the grid, it has to be resold at wholesale and not at retail. There are a couple ways to do this, but we should move towards solar.
What would you do to encourage electric vehicles to reduce atmospheric discharge of nitrogen, which pollutes our world?
Very similar. Listen, the government encourages behavior through incentives or mandates. It's the bottom line. I mean, it's just math. It's just math, incentives or mandates. Sometimes in the mandate world, it gets a little too aggressive. Industry can't meet it, so we need to incentivize it. I guess I would lead with this, because this is true across a lot of areas. Gubernatorial candidates, a lot of candidates get asked a lot of questions. And I believe there's a way through incentives and mandates to get to greater adoption of electric vehicles. But I'm going to give you a fundamental truth of politics, too. And I have a quip that kind of works. This governor is not the smartest person in the state. But the coda is your next governor is not going to be either. The reason I say this is my leadership style is not to try to have the answer for everything. It is to surround myself with subject matter experts capable of leading the state. So I'm not intimidated by that. I'm strengthened by that. My leadership style is to lead shoulder to shoulder. So whether it is in public education, the state university system, clean and renewable energies, frankly, gun violence prevention, public health, my job, my hope, is to build a team of adults, of super competent subject matter experts capable together of leading the state forward. That includes in spaces like this.
Since climate disasters threaten Florida's economic and environmental health, will you declare climate change to be a threat to Florida's economic and environmental health? Once in the office of governor, to recognize the cause of climate crisis and work to limit the use of fossil fuels?
Yes, 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 and yes.
What would you do to help small farmers stay in business and help to protect their local food supplies?
Yeah, listen, there are three main economic drivers in the state: ag, construction, and tourism. Ag is probably the one under the greatest amount of threat, and we just have to make a decision as a state as to where we go with ag and some of the environmental questions. Bob Graham signed the 1985 Growth Management Act. I'm not going to give you a TED Talk on that, but we ultimately abandoned smart growth in the state of Florida, and Rick Scott actually made it illegal to even consider smart growth in the state of Florida, and now this governor has just decided to give away the keys of the kingdom to any economic interest that's going to further his own pursuits. We need a smart growth plan in the state of Florida, and that includes protecting the environment, investing in the environment. It means labor. It means the disruption coming from AI. It means what are we doing with mass transit and transportation. But I think it should also include how we are investing in the three main economic drivers: construction, tourism, and agriculture. Look, I worked on Capitol Hill one way or another for about 20 years. And so the history of both Everglades restoration and citrus greening are stuff that I know well, that the current fights, if you will, with sugar down south. There is a lot that we need to do better, particularly in the runoff space and some other areas. But what I will tell you is I do hope that the research coming out of the University of Florida solves the citrus crisis. But as a backyard farmer, what I think we should consider is making Florida the pomegranate capital of the world. Because they're incredibly resilient, the profit margins are high, and they'll grow just about anywhere, and every tree produces crop. So now, is that the right answer? I don't know. I have no idea. But my point is, we're not thinking creatively about the future of the agricultural economy, particularly when it comes to the small farmer, the small ag commodity that is left untouched by all of the federal bailout and federal investment that we might otherwise see. This also, if we get this right, drives down costs at the local farmers market at a time when food prices continue to escalate.
And pomegranates are brain food.
It's a superfruit. They're incredibly. Go buy a pomegranate tree tonight and watch. Watch what happens. Watch. We have about 12 of them at home. Yeah.
Okay. Will you once in office of the governor stand with the people of Florida instead of the phosphate industry and put a stop to the expansion of Florida phosphates?
Yeah, thank you. Listen, campaign finance reform is something we desperately need. I want to ban the unlimited political committees that take unlimited money. And frankly, I support the public financing of campaigns. And at the root of all of this is exactly that. Look, I think here's the bottom line. We're going to follow the science, and follow the science to protect the environment, to protect our way of life. Where there are natural resources that have to be used to support the economy and the quality of life of Floridians, we're going to have to find that balance. But we've abandoned the science behind all of this, and because of a corrupt campaign finance system, we've just given away Florida's land and our treasure and our water, and we shouldn't and should stop.
One question for the audience. How many of you voted in the last presidential campaign? Oh my, isn't that wonderful? And soon you will be, young man. And how many are going to vote in the next one? There we go, you won. Now we're going to take some questions, a little short time questions from the audience. In order to do that, we have two microphones, one on each side. Jeffrey, would you want to come up? And let's start with the first man in the purple, 2, 3, and then we'll see where we go.
Ready? Okay.
This is a personal question for you. Anyway, I'll say it loud. This is a personal question. I've watched you evolve from a Republican to a Democrat on the Nicole Wallace show for the past many years. What I want to know is, what was the one thing that took you and made the decision to step out of the Republican Party into where you are today?
Yeah, thank you for that. I typically don't put my finger on one thing, but if there was an inflection point, it was the elevation and rise of the president, of Trump and Trumpism. Look, I was a Bush 41 Republican, never quite good enough for my own party, fought the Tea Party and lost, fought the Freedom Caucus and lost, and ultimately fought Trumpism and said, that's it, I'm out. Look, you could pull a lot of votes where I took some very conservative votes, I'm sure you can, but understand even as a Republican in 2013, I was one of the only proponents of marriage equality. I ended up supporting gun violence prevention legislation, as I mentioned, reproductive freedom, Planned Parenthood. Campaign finance reform landed me on 60 Minutes, demonstrating how you can lose every one of your friends in Washington if you choose to. So I was always a bit of a protagonist within my own party, but you were always fighting to kind of, you thought you could win the day, right? And honestly, I didn't. I lost those fights within the party. I was on Bill Maher, and he asked me a similar question, and I said, look, I hope my kids know that I stayed and fought. I want them to know I put up the fight. But at times I want my kids to learn that there are fights you walk away from. My biggest concern of the rise of the current president is that a lot of times people said he hijacked the Republican Party. He didn't. He walked through the front doors to the open arms of the party. And it surprised me. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. When I called on him to drop out of the race in 2015, look, I don't often talk about this. I don't often get this question. In the 16th cycle, I was the only Republican, elected Republican, to call on Donald Trump to drop out of the race. This was before the Cheney-Kinzinger years. This was all that. I never stopped, I never wavered, and I never got behind the president. And you could argue I may have lost my seat over that. I'm not sure that's the case. We were involved in a redistricting, but you know when I did it, it was when he called for the Muslim ban in December of 15. In December of 15, I already knew this guy's crazy. I'm not with him. You know, maybe he'll break a lot of things and that could help, but this is not my guy. December of 15, he called for the Muslim ban, and I could see the snickers among some of my colleagues. They thought it was funny. Some of them agreed with it. And I saw an intellectual disconnect between a security issue and a religious freedom issue that no one else in my party seemed to see or care to see. And so I went to the House floor, and I called on Donald Trump to drop out of the race from the House floor. And the way I did it, I knew I wanted to speak to Republicans and to people of faith. And forgive me for using this language. Some of you will recognize it depending on your faith. I stood in the well of the House and I said, Mr. Speaker, I'm a born-again Christian who believes in the saving grace of the Jesus Christ who I call my God. And the beautiful thing about this moment is I can stand in front of my colleagues and in front of the country and say that without fear of reprisal. But if Donald Trump has his way, we may not have that liberty to express our religious freedom anymore in this country. I saw that as a threat. My colleagues didn't. I never came around, and obviously throw in all the other stuff. You know, the Access Hollywood tape came out when I was actually in a hurricane hunter in the eye of a hurricane. It's a true story. In one of those, you know, the NOAA planes. We land, and it's been out in the news for about 3 hours. It's the only time my staff ever had the courage, and I respect them for it, to issue a statement from me without me signing off. And look, I love the guy who wrote it. He's a brother to me. But he felt the desperation, the urgency. We got to get a statement out. I'm not going to talk to Jolly. He's in the middle of a hurricane. And when I landed, he had issued a statement saying, you know, condemning the language shouldn't be used, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, that man's celebrating sexual assault. And we need to call it sexual assault and condemn him and call him unqualified to be president. My party just never saw it that way. And ultimately, I ended up leaving that party.
How do you plan on funding everything that you're talking about for public education?
Very simple. The tourist development tax dollars right now, there are two ways to do this, and I commissioned the financial study on it. It's not ready to disseminate statewide because of some sensitivities around it. Let me tell you how we use tourist development tax dollars right now. Billions and billions of dollars coming into the state in tourist taxes. The state law requires us to use them on more tourism. Makes intuitive sense. No one's trying to cripple the tourist industry, but it's a very inelastic industry. And the reality is we currently use it to build more convention centers, to fund more promotions out of state, to advertise our beaches on the Chicago L in the middle of January when it's snowing. All good, smart stuff. But we don't have a crisis of convention centers in the state of Florida. We have a crisis in teacher pay and a crisis in public education. And so I have proposed using a portion of our tourist development tax dollars to fund a pay raise, 30% pay raise, that gets us into the top half nationally. Now, there are some actuarial lessons from how we did the lottery, where Republican legislators have stolen that money to backfill other priorities. And so it may be the way we need to do it is a new tourist development tax that is lockbox specifically for teacher pay using the lessons from the lottery. There's a way to do it. There's actually a formulaic way to make sure the money has to go towards public education. We know it's not a big tax. For every $100 someone pays in taxes, it's basically 101. Funds a 10-year renaissance in public education. And here's the thing. People don't stop coming to Florida because of a $5 rental car tax. They stop coming because of fear of gun violence and they feel unwelcome. Tourism is very inelastic. There is a way to fund public education using our tourist economy. I would also say as a state, this is a broader conversation about the economy of Florida for the next 10 to 20 years. A state with no income tax, where we artificially limit and manipulate taxable values of our homes, good public policy, but it's a limitation on revenue. Where are we going to drive the priority needs we have? Where is there revenue for that? I actually think a responsible way to do this is to look towards our tourist development tax dollars, because we have seen it does not reduce tourism, and everyone wins when we do that.
One of the things that I speak to people on is this, it's really directly related to that last question. The money you want to use is tourism. So we've seen the overall state growth rate in tourism go from 1.7% in 2024 to 0.1% in 2025, driven by 10 to 15% fewer Canadians coming each quarter. These people, they come here for weeks, they come here for months, they drive spending, they drive tax dollars. So what is your plan to end the Canadian boycott and market Florida to bring those people back?
Yeah, listen, as I just mentioned, I think the biggest driver of that, outside of some tariff stuff on travel and some new screening that's an encumbrance for some overseas visitors, not necessarily Canada. When I mentioned wanting to make a point of apologizing for the culture wars, declaring that Florida is welcome to all now, we want you to visit, we want you to raise your kids here, I actually think that has economic value. To be a governor that says everyone is welcome in the state of Florida again. I really do. And along the way, if we can tackle the gun violence prevention issue, I want to be a governor that goes into federal court to try to sue to overturn open carry in the state of Florida. I think there's some things we can do to welcome more people.
What are you going to do to help reduce the gun violence? And I know about gun violence because I was shot at in Vietnam and I was shot at on the streets of Columbia, Missouri.
Thank you for that question and for your personal testimony. Let me start with a fundamental premise that I believe is true and absolutely defensible. We will not take a firearm from a law-abiding citizen in the state of Florida. The Second Amendment is a fundamental right, but it is not an absolute right. And follow me what I mean by that. We have fundamental rights of speech, assembly, press, but you can't run into a movie theater and yell fire. You can't assemble in the middle of an intersection without being held accountable for it. The press can't actually write anything they want. If they cross a certain standard, it becomes libel. So we are going to protect the fundamental right of firearm ownership for law-abiding citizens. However, we should absolutely pursue universal and comprehensive background checks. We don't have them in the state of Florida, and frankly, I would say even as Democrats, we need to get better with our language. We have a criminal conviction check. A criminal conviction check. A great example of where that falls through is a home with serial domestic violence. 3, 4 calls to the police to come out, but the victim won't provide a victim statement for understandable reasons. That 5th time they go to Walmart, buy a gun on demand, and take it home and use it. Yeah, because there's not a criminal conviction check, and if there's not a red flag law, listen, I think that should be triggered in a background check. I also think in addition to universal and comprehensive background checks, we should require licensing in the state of Florida for the owner, not for the firearm, but for the owner. I think we should require storage requirements and training certification that includes storage. And what I would like to ask Florida voters via constitutional amendment, because it's the only way it may even pass muster, it's going to be a fight on our hand, I think we should consider requiring insurance in the state of Florida for firearm owners. What it does is it moves the background check to the private sector that's going to be far more specific and able to determine the risk. If you are a law-abiding citizen with no record and no threats of violent behavior, you're going to be able to have your firearm without fear of reprisal or confiscation, and I will defend that right. But if you are someone with a propensity for violence and a firearm is not something you can responsibly own and use, then you shouldn't have it in the state of Florida.
Okay, unfortunately, we're running out of time. We have one last question, unfortunately.
On a citizen initiative for the right to clean water for a good length of time. Our governor has totally destroyed the capacity of the citizens to be able to get involved in amending the Constitution and bringing about legislation. What's your position on restoring that?
Yeah, bring back direct democracy. Get essentially what are modern day poll taxes out of the way of petition organizers and the ability to put a voter initiative on the ballot. I do think we should lower the threshold from 60 to 50. Listen, I do think we should be prudent about amending the Constitution because sometimes it gets hard to undo that. And the law should always be a little more reflexive. The legislature should be more capable, but this legislature has not proven capable of that. And I would also say this legislature stands in the way of direct democracy, and I'll give you 3 very good examples. Reproductive freedom, Amendment 4, recreational marijuana, and open primaries all got 55 to 57% public support at the ballot box. But because it didn't receive 60, it wasn't put in the Constitution. Well, here's the dirty little secret. More than 50% of the state voted for it and asked for it. This legislature and this governor could give it to us right now. And so one of the things that I have promised as governor is if a constitutional amendment, outside of being able to change the 60% threshold, if a constitutional amendment gets over 50%, I'm going to fight to enact it legislatively. We don't have to wait for a constitutional amendment to do that. That means reproductive freedom. That means recreational marijuana. Yes, that means open primaries. And it's interesting because when you lump those 3 issues together, not everybody's good with all 3. They're not. But the principle should be the same. If a majority of the state has asked to go in a certain direction, then let's go there. I voted for Amendment 4, but I didn't vote for recreational marijuana. I voted for open primaries, but I know a lot of my Democratic friends say, oh, let's be careful about that. But the state asked for it. And we're either going to fight for the majority of the state or we're going to let partisanship and ideological reflex interfere with that. I think we need to fight for the majority of the state. Let's lower the threshold to 50%. Where it fails the 60% threshold, let's be a governor and a legislature with the boldness to enact where this state wants to go.